Welcome at the OECD Berlin Centre. We have an important discussion today on green hydrogen, a subject of great interest, of course, to German industry in the transition to net zero by mid-century, but also a great opportunity for many developing and emerging countries. And so my colleague Joseph Cordonnier is going to present a new paper on this. And after that, we have a very distinguished group of experts who will debate with us what the opportunities are and how to make sure that the development of hydrogen, green hydrogen, is actually it's green and clean, that there's no greenwashing, but that's more generally that it's going to be a sustainable endeavor. So I'm very happy to welcome Heino von Meyer, who's here representing PTX Hub, GIT's endeavor to look into the opportunities of green hydrogen and other green substances, really. Monika Sturm represents Siemens Energy and has joined us from the United Arab Emirates today, where she's exploring the same issue to talk about what Siemens Energy sees as opportunities, but also talk about some devices they have developed together with the German Energy Agency to make sure that it's actually green, the hydrogen that's being developed. Andrea Triki represents the German Energy Agency, dena, welcome. And we also have Vanessa Séverin, and she represents one of the countries that sees a lot of opportunities in green hydrogen, namely Chile. She's here from InvestChile. So without further ado, Joseph, I let you take the floor and you will introduce us into the subject. And I'm looking forward to our debate later.
Okay, perfect. Then I will start. So thanks everyone for joining. I will present today the work we have been undertaking at the OECD Environment Directorate on low carbon hydrogen opportunities for emerging and developing economies. First of all, a bit of background. So we're working in a team that is called the Clean Energy Finance and Investment Mobilization. We work with 8 emerging economies. So Colombia in Latin America, Egypt and South Africa, and 5 Asian economies, so India, Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. And our team works on improving enabling conditions in renewables, that we mean by renewable energy in general, also energy efficiency, and since last year, industry decarbonization. So when we started our work on industry transition, we had a lot of exchanges with our countries on those key technologies that can help decarbonize the industry and how to finance them. And many of those partner countries, seconded as well by OECD member countries, mentioned the role that low carbon hydrogen will play. And for that reason, we released last year our first working paper on that topic, which I will present today. First of all, according to most of the net zero emission scenario or net zero emission pathways that are providing ways to decarbonize the economy by 2050, we can see that green hydrogen or low carbon hydrogen is one of the technology solutions that are key to achieve net zero. This is what you can see on the right side of the slide here. So it goes along direct electrification, it goes along CCUS, increased development of renewables, of course, reduced energy demand, which can be through circular economy, material efficiency, energy efficiency as well. And green hydrogen has a role to play for 10 to 15% of emissions reductions globally. And that would lead, which you can also see on the chart, to a multiplication of current hydrogen demand, which is around 100 million tons per year, to at least 500 million tons per year in 2050 in those net zero scenarios. Then there are a lot of potential applications for hydrogen, and this was also one of the main questions of our partner countries, to know where to position, what are the applications that could be prioritized. In our case, our work on green hydrogen stems for the industry. And for that reason, we have also identified in the industry sector a range of applications that are no regrets. Those are primarily the ones where hydrogen is actually already used today, such as for fertilizer production as well methanol production, and therefore the switch to low carbon hydrogen does not require to adjust too much the end use applications. But beyond the industry, it's also important to notice that green hydrogen can be used, for instance, in long-haul transportation. This is, for instance, the case for the maritime industry, and as well, depending on the country context, for instance, for increasing the penetration of variable renewable energy, such as wind and solar, as hydrogen can also be a way to store the electricity. So in the evolution of demand between 2020 and 2050, you can also see that the industry sector will continue to play a major role, but that other applications may represent around half of the hydrogen demand in here in the IRENA scenario to meet 1.5 degrees climate goal. So in our working paper, what was our approach? First, the key backdrop for us was to address the entire value chain of hydrogen, stemming from renewable electricity resources, but also land availability, water availability, or at least avoiding water-stressed regions. The manufacturing of electrolyzers as well, which in turn can require some critical materials. And for that reason, it's also key for countries to understand what are the implications of developing a local electrolyzer industry. Moving then to the midstream part of hydrogen production, which relies a lot on infrastructures. And here again, country specificities can play a key role in determining what a country strategy could be. Typically, large-scale hydrogen storage today is mainly driven by the availability of geological storage capabilities. So that may also discard or provide great opportunities for specific countries. And moving to the end use, in emerging economies, we have seen two key pillars in the strategy. The first one being the development of domestic consumption, not only to produce hydrogen, but also to produce green products. So the development of green hydrogen can also go together with the development of a green industry, for instance, for steelmaking or fertilizers. And in parallel of this, we have also seen that many emerging economies were targeting exports. So this is also a way through the conversion and transport of hydrogen, for instance, through the form of ammonia or being associated with other molecules, to provide an improvement of the trade balance of emerging economies that are endowed with favorable conditions to develop that market. Analyzing the value chain, it's also important to look at how the projects can be designed, and this can also be linked a lot to the country's characteristics. So we here depict three main models that we have seen. The first one being to install renewable electricity where it is the less expensive, and then transporting the electricity to produce hydrogen with the electrolyzer close to the end use being in the industry, in the mobility sector, or in the power sector. Another model that we have seen emerging, and maybe this is the one that is the most reflected in our case studies, is the co-location of low-cost renewables and electrolyzers, and then transporting the hydrogen mainly through dedicated pipelines to the end use, or possibly to exports as well. And the third model, which is also being developed, is to have all items co-located, but here, of course, it depends specifically on the ability to have access to land, low-cost renewable power, and industry at a single location. So this also depends really on very specific locations. And what is important here in choosing the project design is not only what a given location can provide, but it's also how to optimize the load factor for the electrolysis production and thereby improving costs. So two of the main drivers for the cost of hydrogen will be the cost of renewable power and also the load factor, so the number of hours that the electrolyzer runs every year. And each of these project designs have potential to improve these factors and therefore the total cost of the project. The second key aspect is also the availability of infrastructure. So depending on the existing power grid, gas grid, or ability to develop the industry in a given country, different project design can be applied to find the optimum solution. So this was the first part of the analysis. Now, what do we come with in our working paper? First, with a list of statements and a checklist of questions along the value chain to help countries at an early stage of defining the strategy in identifying what are the sweet spots for them to position, what are the applications, and what are the for instance, more endowed to become exporting countries or to become a country that develops its own industry for hydrogen consumption. And together with this, we have also focused on case studies of flagship projects, so projects that have reached final investment decisions or are close to do it, to identify and highlight the specificities and key success factors of those projects. So just to give a few examples. So the first one is HF Global in Chile. So this is an e-fuel project, which relies on access to very good onshore wind production, up to 60-65% capacity factor. And there is already production of e-gasoline today by combining the hydrogen production with direct air capture of CO2. So this is still a small-scale project, producing e-gasoline and exporting it to Europe at the moment. But this enabled to de-risk all the technology blocks and to make a proof of concept at industrial scale. And the construction of the first large-scale project is starting this year, which is again based on low-cost onshore wind, combined in this case with CO2 capture from industrial emissions. Mm-hmm. So what is important here is that the business rationale is really driven by this access to electricity and the existence of the synthetic fuel market that can be sold at a premium. And there is an existing market for this in the high-end range of automotives. And on the financing part, it's also interesting to see that this company has managed to raise more than 250 or more than $300 million today in equity. The second example that is, in that case, not in an emerging economies, but in an advanced countries for steel is H2 Green Steel. This is here the project to produce 2.5 million tons of steel. So that means around 1% of European production capacity in a brand new plant in Northern Europe. And here, again, the drivers were access to cheap renewable electricity, in that case, hydropower, which is on top very stable, but also the willingness from first mover customers to pay a premium for steel manufacturers with low emission. So these were two key success factors of that project, so construction has now started. And two other elements were mentioned by the company in order to replicate these similar models to emerging economies, which was the access to infrastructure, as well as a very lean permitting process, including the local buy-in from the local community. So to make sure that the project could run smoothly in a favorable environment. So I have many other case studies in the reports. Here we summarize a bit the findings. I have described some of them. So without going in all details, what is important here is we have categorized the key lessons in 4 main types. So the impact on business model. So what was the business model that helped those projects to reach final investment decision? Then the project governance, with a special emphasis on how to build vertically integrated partnerships and how to build public-private partnerships. And that includes access to infrastructure, access to cheap renewable power, but also the involvement of off-takers. The enabling market conditions and de-risking investment, which is also the role that the public sector can play, and I will describe this in the next slide. And then the financing aspect. So once the first 3 blocks are a bit finalized for a given project, the question is how to optimize the financing to share the risk among actors, or the ticket size of those investments is extremely large. And here what we have noticed through the case studies is that most of the projects we have analyzed rely on project finance to replicate a bit the success of similar nascent industry over the last decade, such as offshore wind. So on this slide, I won't detail all the solutions. This is also available in our working paper. We have analyzed a series of measures that the public sector could take in order to foster the market creation and market growth. This is, of course, not fully linear in reality, and some elements of the market growth are actually sometimes implemented before other ones. The importance of this slide is more to show, first, the importance to have policy packages that cover the whole value chain. And second, to see the series of measures that can be taken. I have circled in red the ones that stakeholders have selected as the most important ones during webinar we have organized last year. And one can see that, for instance, in the market creation phase, the expectations from industry actors and finance institutions is a lot on measures that are simple to implement, such as duty relief on renewable energy assets, or integration of hydrogen in infrastructure and energy roadmaps to provide a clear vision and development plan. Whereas for the market growth, we have also more complex schemes that were highlighted, such as the use of blended finance. So how can the public sector finance part of the projects in order to de-risk them and crowd in private finance? And also, for instance, guarantees of origin that are keys to certify that hydrogen is sustainably produced when it's traded. So for this year, we are organizing a series of webinars to deep dive on a few of those solutions that have been highlighted by our key contacts. Here is a summary of the first webinar that we hold in end of January 2023. So we invited OECD member countries, international organizations, and private sectors who have developed or are working on certification mechanisms to share their latest findings and provide insights as well on what the next steps and targets would be. So a first key element is that the scope and boundaries of the certification mechanisms should reach a minimum set of criteria that could be shared between various schemes in order to facilitate the harmonization and interoperability. So many of those schemes already exist, between 10 and 15. The question is also how to make how to harmonize them, or how to make them interoperable, with 2 main purposes. The first one being to work on sustainable domestic production. So to ensure basically that projects and hydrogen produced is actually low carbon or sustainable, which can go beyond CO2 emissions, but also includes some social criteria, for instance. And the second one is to make sure that these certification mechanisms are well understood by various actors and well recognized across the globe to facilitate international trade of hydrogen. So most of the projects we have analyzed so far and are relying on bilateral contracts, but this is expected to move towards regional markets or global markets. And in that sense, certification mechanisms will play a key role to facilitate and provide comfort to trading partners. So this is here the last slide that we have. As you understood, hydrogen is still quite a nascent topic for the OECD. We have worked already on several projects on how to finance hydrogen, how to establish strategies for countries, especially the emerging economies. And of course, there are many other areas where the OECD could work and add value to the international debate, such as on the international governance of low carbon hydrogen, or providing additional deep dives on policy analysis or enabling measures for financing projects. And we're also happy to hear your question and thoughts of other panelists on where the OECD can develop its activities on hydrogen. Thank you very much for your attention, and happy to move to the next part of the webinar.
Yeah. Thanks, Joseph, for this super introduction. And before I go into the discussion with the panelists, I have a very practical question for you from the audience, which is from Michael Pittelkoff, who's asking, is there a replay of the January 31st webinar, because apparently he's very interested in certification. So if you do have that, maybe you can post it in the chat.
I will post it. We have a recording, and we also have summary notes for those who don't want to spend 3 hours watching the recording.
That's good. Great. Yeah, and maybe Vanessa. So because here we've talked about, right, the opportunities for developing in emerging countries. Chile is an emerging country, or maybe already emerged OECD member, but with a long history of resource wealth. I think when we talked before, now you're looking to develop green hydrogen opportunities. And what I would like to know from you is what is the strategy? Because I think you've learned some painful, Chile has learned some painful lessons also from exploiting these resources, molybdenum, copper in the past. So how do you want to use this to truly have also perhaps industrial development in the country, make sure it's environmentally and socially sustainable? What is the plan in Chile?
Well, hello everyone. Indeed, it's a very good question, and I think it's a challenge that are facing all the emerging countries that are traditionally exporters of raw materials. And indeed, this time, Chile has launched a strategy for the development of green hydrogen that considers local development. It's important to stress that the development of green hydrogen in Chile is only one tool of the carbon neutrality that the government is launching. We have to combine with electromobility, with energy efficiency, and of course now the strategy on development of green hydrogen. The strategy is based on 4 pillars. You have obviously the permit and regulation that allows the development of the green hydrogen projects. You also have the development of domestic market, which is like the big change, and international partnerships, because it is also a strategy that is looking to export green hydrogen. You have the financing and the incentives, which is obviously very important for the development of technology and the projects, and also a big stress on local development. So Chile now is actually will be launching a study on the potential domestic demand for green hydrogen, because as you can see actually in the study, you can have applications also for the steel industry, maybe the mining industry and the heavy trucks. So Chile is looking to develop local demand and local industry around green hydrogen, but also to export on the global market. So that's the big change regarding the past experiences that we had, and also the green hydrogen strategy has the SDG throughout all the pillars and all the measures that will be taken. So it's also another difference that the community will be involved in the development of the action plans. and Chile is looking to take advantage of this development with the training and the employment of highly skilled people and the development of industries, considering the development of upstream industry and maybe looking for investments in the electrolyzers facilities and that kind of development around generation of green hydrogen. Because as you say, as we know, Chile is a big player because it has one of the best opportunities in renewable energy generation. And we intend to take advantage of this, but without forgetting like the development of the local industry. So we are actually working on an action plan to implement this strategy, and it will be an action plan from 2023 to 2030. And that's why we are going to launch this study on the local demand, because we understand that if there's no application in the country, it will be very hard to develop a local industry, right?
Yeah, thank you very much. It will be interesting to see how it goes this time, to have the downstream and upstream industries developed. And Monika, I think I have another question already for you in the audience, because so Uwe Fritsche was asking, so what about additionality of green electricity for H2 production? I think this is, well, maybe not the additionality, but your project with dena is essentially about making sure that green energy is not double counted, right, in various uses. So maybe you can just, this is a bit technical, but maybe you can just talk about that a little bit, and gladly also going to, I'm gladly going to hear to any insights you might have from the various projects you're following as Siemens Energy from in Chile or other places of the world, perhaps even where you are now, where you see the opportunities, but also the pitfalls.
Yeah, Nicola, thank you. And thank you to all who have given such a great introduction. Thanks, Joseph, really appreciate it and like the presentation and also what Vanessa summarized. Yeah, for us as Siemens Energy, I think it's important to decarbonize, to do any activities in the decarbonization area. But we also believe that this is a team play. This is not what one company can solve. So here we are really trying to partner and to have this kind of decarbonization and certification in a very trusted way. So if we just have seen over the last couple of weeks, when you can read in the press everything about the carbon offset, which is largely not really worth what is stated. So I think certification becomes or gets a really important topic. So what is really produced in the green way? How can we prevent this greenwashing and double counting? So I think there we have to work closely together. And when we started to work in this arena, and let me just say, Siemens Energy, yes, is very known for bringing all the assets in the energy markets, but we are also working in supporting the decarbonization by implementing digital solutions. We clearly have seen that this certification topic, there are a lot of activities missing. So there's really no cross-sector certification. We have really missing institutional mechanisms for doing certification in the area of production and also consumption of hydrogen. And just imagine, and I like the project which we are currently doing in Chile, where we connect the wind park. Yeah, I know we started with one windmill, but I think the plan is to really build a big wind park there and then connect it to an hydrolyzer. And then from the producing or manufacturing of hydrogen using carbon capture to manufacture green methanol, which then will be exported, you know. This is a chain, and how can we prove that this chain of energy is really clean or green? Yeah, and I think this is here a key issue, because the benefit of having something green and clean is a kind, you know, the off-takers really get a benefit out of it. So on the one hand, if we can prove that this energy is green, it can be used for the carbon border adjustments, which helps again in investing into these new projects, but also the product value that you can prove that the, let me say, taken as an example, the green methanol is being used. The product value of a steel, of whatever you use, the energy is really becoming much bigger. So here we started to team up, and what you mentioned, Nicola, already with dena and also with a certifying body, as Siemens Energy is not a notified body, to build up an open platform for certifying this cross-sector energy tracking. So we really build up an ecosystem for verifying the renewable energy across sectors and also across countries, because also here there is no system currently in place. And for making that possible, we really connect our assets with a little bit of software, let me say it like that, to capture the amount of energy which is produced and really track the way the, let me say, the electron is taken from the beginning to the way to the, let me say, becoming e-fuel. Again, I take the example of the project in Chile, because in the end, the methanol is then transported to Europe, and the off-taker in our case is Porsche, and this Porsche is taking the e-fuel and testing it in the first run. But in the end, this e-fuel will be used for the big trucks, for the big ships, in order also to decarbonize the mobility sector. So this is really our pledge to be able to track it. I know that there are many different schemes available from different organizations, but to really make it possible, I think we should focus on having a kind of standard to have one ability to certify energy in a standardized way. I think this is what we would like to build up together. And here we are really open. I'm very grateful that we started this activity together with dena and TÜV Süd, and really make an example, yeah, how it could work.
Thanks, Monika. And do you think perhaps it sounds a bit as if because we're really talking about global value chains here, molecules going through different stages, it sounds as if we always almost need an international standard setter of certifications, right, to make sure that these certifications are reliable and make sure there's,
I think maybe, you know, there should be a kind also of openness that you have different certification schemes. So from my experience, I don't think that we will have one worldwide standard, that we will have standards in different regions, but we have to build, let me say, a kind of I like to use the comparison. We have to build a road so that we connect all the different areas and that we can run on that road all the different certification schemes. Mm-hmm. But this kind of infrastructure layer has to be built, that we agree how we can certify across different energy forms, across different countries, that we can transport this information in a controlled and trusted way. So I think this is the important thing we would like to build together. And yeah, maybe we start with a road, and in the end, in 5 to 10 years, we have a highway with 6 lanes where a lot of different types of certificates can be issued. This is what we like to enable, because there will not be one standard, but it should be one, let me say, open system where production and off-takers can select the certificates they would like to use and approve to governmental organization or whatever.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I wasn't going to suggest we need one certificate, one standard, but more a minimum standard for different certificates and a way perhaps for recognizing what is a reliable standard. It reminds me a bit of the OECD chemical works, where people sit together and decide on minimum standards how to identify chemical safety. It's very technical, right? But it can be crucial. And it sounds a bit similar. Andrea, so we talked already, we took a deep dive into the certification and additionality issue, but maybe coming back to, well, Chile. Chile's opportunities it offers, and for sure this time it wants to benefit also through broader, developing the value chain. But of course, Germany, German Energy Agency, is interested, so has industrial uses already, needs to green these uses, and works with Chile, but many other countries, because the abundance of renewables is certainly not there in Germany. So how about that? How do you look at that? What are the places you're looking at? And perhaps because we were talking about sustainability, I'm curious to hear, because we said Chile and then it's going to be used at Porsche, but it's a long way from Chile to Stuttgart. So how about transport? When you look at these global value chains, because that can be challenging to be made sustainable as well.
Yeah, thanks, Nicola, for bringing me into this like very hot topic and already lining out that there's kind of maybe trade-offs also being involved. And I think also Monika with their certification scheme, I think the question to like what role does additionality play is also a good example for that, right? Because I mean, what I'm excited about the certification tool that Monika just described is that I think it can really look at this whole value chain and track it and get at the data that we need in order to prevent greenwashing, right? But then also on the other hand, the question of additionality was probably hinting towards the regulation behind and the standards that we develop, and that they're not perfect, right? So, and particularly in a ramp up phase, so to say, the EU, at least at the moment, with the delegated acts being out there and the methodology being proposed, yeah, had kind of agreed on loosening the criteria in a ramp up phase, and then by that also, you know, allowing for a certain flexibility for companies in the beginning. This means, however, I think we should be transparent about that in the beginning, the actual emissions accounted of RFMBOs, if you talk about the European scheme, will be higher than what we are like booking, so to say. And I think we just need to be transparent about that. And this is trade-offs that that need to be made in the political sphere behind this these methodologies. But then we need to think about how to not make these discrepancies bigger. And I think here tools like the certification scheme that we are developing here together are really helpful, because they're making this very complex methodologies more better implementable. They're making it more transparent, and also this like this double accounting issue that has been raised, this can also be tackled by that. So I think there is ways to improve here, but still, yeah, tools like that can help to also make it more transparent in the meanwhile. What they don't cover yet, and I think this is what you were hinting also with your question, is like social sustainability standards that I think we also need to really talk about, particularly when we talk about how to implement or how to address this desire to also implement bigger parts of the value chain in countries like Chile, right? And I think this is also big learning that we should have drawn from past technologies and and maybe also some failed projects when thinking about, I don't know, for example, Desertec, that the social dimensions really need to be in the focus, and we really need to develop also good standards here if you want to combine this creation of local value chains in emerging countries, and also building up this global market.
Thank you, Andrea. And I think, Heino, this is really the moment to pull you into the discussion, because you've worked extensively on, basically you have a paper also on the on looking at the sustainability of green hydrogen development in a broader sense. And perhaps you can just describe why you think that's important and what you think are the key issues that we need to look at in order to get this broader sustainability impact that that countries like Chile are looking for.
Well, thank you, Nicola. Before I do, let me just say that I'm grateful to be back at OECD. And I think it's great to see that OECD is now directing its analytical capacities to also looking at hydrogen and what we would call power to X. So converting renewable electricity into any kind of feedstock or fuel. It's great that the OECD is now also having the Secretariat for the Climate Club, as it's called in Germany, but I think you found a much better title now, Inclusive Forum, which makes it clear that this is not about the rich man's club, but really reaching out to all countries. And I think at the first meeting, there were already more than 100 countries. So building on this, like in the text work of the OECD, can be, I think, very promising. And we have already heard we need international agreements on certification, on standards. And I think here the OECD could really play an important role together with the IAA and others. So coming to the paper by Joseph and Bigger, and I think, again, very positive for me, focus on developing and emerging economies, looking at green hydrogen, not bothering with blue and low carbon, etc., although we have to address those issues. Looking beyond hydrogen, looking at the entire value chain of power to X to end products, be it steel, be it ammonia, etc. So I think it's important in the debate, in particular in Germany, where the debate is very often only focused on where can we get cheap green hydrogen imports and neglecting really the development needs of our partner countries. So in this context, I would like to maybe come to what we at the International Power to X Hub are doing, which was set up by the German government and is hosted by GIZ. We have developed what we call the EESG framework. So economic, environmental, social, and governance dimensions of sustainability. And looking at sustainability at the product level, the ton of hydrogen, but even more so at the project level, because we're in the beginning of a huge wave of investments coming into those regions of the world where there is a lot of wind and sun, but which need the framework conditions to do this in a sustainable manner. And therefore, sustainability clearly is more than just environment. We have heard and discussed now already one aspect, which is dominating the debate, and that's greenhouse gas accounting. And I think Monika has given some examples how important this is. And actually, we don't even have an agreed international definition of what green hydrogen or low carbon hydrogen is. IEA is working on this together with the IPHE, and that is important, but clearly not enough. We need to think beyond greenhouse gas accounting and take other dimensions on board. In the environmental dimension, for example, the question, what is the water situation? Because where you have wind and sun, you often have water stress. So a lot of the projects will need desalination. Okay, that's feasible, but what to do with the brine, which is produced and highly polluting? How do we handle those? So it can be managed, but it should be part of an assessment of the sustainability and the quality of the products. Similar things could be talked about, the impacts on land and biodiversity, etc. More important, and Andrea has already mentioned it, and I think Vanessa stressed the importance of local impact and local employment, etc. What are the social dimensions? Starting with, can we import green hydrogen from countries where 50% of the population are not yet even connected to the power grid? Or are there ways of combining it and creating co-benefits that you do both at the time, improve the supply for the local population in electricity, but also in terms of water, but then going beyond, and what about the jobs? Because are there enough skilled labor to run the projects? Big question mark. And even in the construction phase, you will see an inflow of temporal construction workers in often remote regions where after 4 years, when the construction is done, they will not have follow-up employment. So huge issues of managing these workforces, urban development issues, etc. So just exporting then the product to Europe cannot be the answer. So thinking about the value chain that goes with it, what are the value added opportunities for the partner countries is very important. I'm afraid I'm getting too long, but it all comes back in the end. We need to, our fourth sustainability dimension, governance, we need to make sure that there is a proper governance framework as described in Chile. You have a strategy, you have a roadmap, but most importantly, you involve the civil society and the people. And if you don't get them on board, you will fail. So the future of green hydrogen and Power-to-X is not primarily a technology problem, not primarily a financing problem, but an issue of getting the regulatory frameworks and the political frameworks right. With that, I stop. I would have loved to maybe also raise the issue of the Dutch disease, like
but there will be more rounds, Heino. Hold it.
Maybe
we
I
have some time.
Thank you.
I think though that this was very fitting for the moment, and also we have a lively debate in the chat. So I think I'm going to dwell a little bit with Vanessa first on the social dimension and industrial development, because there was one interesting and intriguing question to you that was very much that fits very well what then came in terms of, oh, we have to look at the social dimension. So it's basically Martin. I don't know where Martin comes from, but he's asking, okay, but it didn't work with lithium. It didn't work with copper and molybdenum, so that industrial development to the benefit of local people. What are you going to do differently this time? And then a second very thorny question, unless we have global standards, is, okay, but if this time around, for example, you ask international investors to have a local industrial development dimension, will it not become unattractive to them? And could that mean that they will go elsewhere. So how are you juggling this, new vision for more local development with the fact that you're also in global competition with what you can offer?
All right. Well, Martin, thank you for the question. I would say that first, saying that it is not working for lithium, it's not entirely true. It's a work in progress. Actually, the government is working on a strategy for lithium. There should be any announcement next month regarding how the government is going to tackle this issue. There are some agreements with the companies to develop value-added projects related to lithium in Chile. It should be happening very soon. At least it was in the agreements that were signed between the government and the companies. So it is indeed different, because the lithium industry was existing since like many years ago, and it didn't have like a big strategy before its development, which is like the big change with green hydrogen. As I said, we have a big strategy and an action plan, and one of the goals is to develop a local industry, and that is linked to sustainability and social value, obviously, because it is in line with the SDGs. Regarding the question about the attractiveness for international investors, of course, for now, I would say like 90% of the projects are considering exporting, mainly ammonia, to different regions of the world, because for considering the size of the project to be profitable, it is the option they are going for. And it is completely normal, because Chile is indeed very attractive in terms of exports, one of the best production prices, right, for green hydrogen. And but this is the role of the government. It's to actually shape incentives and subsidies to foster local demand that can be developed by local companies also, and finance internationally. But that is also why we are doing a study on local demand, because if there is a local demand mainly associated with big industry such as mining, heavy duty trucks, or steel, they can be business opportunities too locally. But it is true that it is not easy to try to develop like the export industry and also local demand. But we are trying to do that, and we will soon have the action plan that the civil society was actually involved in the making. And also I would like to say that regarding like human capital and the availability of people, it is true, and Chile is actually facing this challenge, but that is why we are working together with private companies and also the local government to put in place some training programs within universities to be able to develop the skills that the industry will need. And it's a project that is going on at a regional level. And that is very important. It's not only the national level that is working on this policy, it's also with the regional governments trying to make sure that the value will develop and stay within the region too.
Very interesting. Thank you, Vanessa. And Joseph, I think we shouldn't forget you, because so you wrote this paper and maybe set up all these criteria. What should countries do to really benefit? And perhaps you can, and because there's so much interest in this local development, social dimension, and this question, so is there a risk that you lose attractiveness for international investors when you focus on that a little bit? What's your answer to that? Is that, or have you answered that question in the paper? Are you looking into this? How should developing and emerging countries approach this particular issue?
Yeah, we have addressed it partly in the paper. I think for many investors, including or focusing on the international investors, the ease of doing business in a given country is important. But as Heino mentioned, for instance, labor skills are critical for any large-scale investors to bid on a project. So there are a list of success factors, and these are not only, of course, on the pure economics. It's also on the ability of the social framework, the political willingness to provide a long-term view. So this is also why we have seen the number of countries releasing hydrogen strategies moving from less than 30 last year or 18 months ago to more than 65 today. And all these enabling conditions are also listed in our paper. So this is not only the monetary conditions, but this goes a bit further. Even though we have seen for these first projects more bilateral agreements, meaning that companies can agree on doing a project at this stage, the hydrogen market is evolving really fast towards markets, and for the markets to be sustainable and to work also properly at regional level and at international level, all the discussion on certification mechanisms is key. And there are a number of initiatives, for instance, the PDX Hub, so Heino mentioned it, but also Green Hydrogen Organization released the standard a few months ago that goes much beyond the greenhouse gas emissions, but try to certify also the social aspects and the governance aspect of each project. And that may become part of the minimum set of criteria to make different certification mechanisms comparable. And this is also what was mentioned, I think, by Monika, that the different standards should be able to speak with each other or to be comparable in some sort of way. And therefore, more and more we see that we go beyond the CO2 emissions, and for a country to attract investment, you also need to embed social governance, economics in your projects and in your policies to attract investments. Maybe just a second point, sorry, just going beyond the international investors. Another work that we're undertaking is also on how the local investors can also chip in and join the projects. So far, we have seen that a bit less in emerging economies, and that relies a lot on international investment. But another question is also how to train and how to have capacity building in the country so that the local financing community can also join the financing of the project.
Thanks, Joseph. That's very important. And I want to go back to something because there's a lively debate among standard setters with digital tools in the chat. And I think I want to pull you back into the discussion, Monika, because there was one remark that said, so SAP also working on solutions on X certification schemes, and what they find is that these different schemes, well, they need to be, of course, they need to be good standards. There needs to be some minimum standard for the standards, but they also need to be able to speak to each other. And there was another interesting remark about biofuels, where basically somebody said, well, but so, you know, what we would have needed to do is to set up a database from the beginning in order to track all this. And so I wanted to ask you, so because you were talking about sort of a digital infrastructure road on which all these certificates can roll, what are the, so if you think about setting this up now as green hydrogen and other applications are being developed, what do you think is needed in order to make sure that these certificates will really do what they're asked to be doing, namely ensuring that the green hydrogen is really clean?
Yeah, I think the key point I would like to mention is that it's easy, usable, that the use of the certificates is not very costly, which is currently the case. If you do a certification for everyone who wants to apply it, it's really a lot of work. You have to access the data to many different databases. So there is not one database, there are many registries. And I think it's so important to find an easy way to access the data. And I've been very often asked, why can't we put everything into one big database? I'm not a fan of these centrally databases, and this is why we really did it in a distributed way, in smaller database, but connected in a way that we are able to trusted exchange the data between the different data hubs. It should be open. It should be, many parts should be open sourced. It should be easily accessible. So that there is really an interest in joining, in having these certificates, because only if we get these certificates, then we can also provide this information and really start decarbonizing our planet. Yeah, if it's too complicated, if it takes too much time, if it's too costly, then this is not accepted. And this is not where we want to go. This is exactly the different. This is also why we said we have to work in an open ecosystem to make it happen. To also, if the access is easy, each and every country can access it. And we don't focus only on the rich countries, let me put it that on the quotes, and don't make it too complicated, because otherwise we will have years of discussions and no outcome. So let's start, let's do it, even if we haven't focused on all details, but let's start with at least the most important ones. The others will come. And that's the way how we started to develop it. Make it easy, make it easily applicable, easy to use, make it open. And we really want to support this way to decarbonize. And this can only happen if we team up, what I said in the beginning. This is our vision, and this is a kind of contribution we want to put into this arena. Hopefully that helps.
Yes, thank you. And Andrea, I want to put to you, so this is about green and clean, but there was also a question from the audience, from Brot für die Welt, where they emphasized again how, from the perspective of countries that have a lot of potential to develop green hydrogen, how important these social sustainability standards are for them. And we already said that it may be key for acceptability for development in the end. But the question of Brot für die Welt was, how does dena work on it together with Siemens Energy? I suppose in this particular project, the question is it doesn't, but you correct me if I'm wrong. But perhaps in other ways you're thinking about this dimension, because you already talked about the failure of Desertec. So how can that dimension be integrated from the beginning, from the perspective of importing countries and countries that develop green hydrogen together, in order to make sure that basically in the end, what is now at the pilot stage can really take off?
Yeah, thanks also Joachim for this question. I saw it and I'm happy to answer it also more broadly. Well, two work streams I would like to highlight here. First, as dena, we're currently working on a study on social sustainability criteria. Joseph has already mentioned that there is some standards now out there that also encompass the social dimensions. We are actually currently analyzing them in more detail because, yes, albeit there is standards that look at this, we see that there's still not many that do so. And on the other hand, if they do, it's still not very detailedly. So the question of how do we then really implement them? How do we monitor it? How do we measure it? I think it's still something that is still rather open. So what we are doing here is that we are currently reaching out to project developers, and we want to discuss with them how are you implementing these standards, which of these standards are most critical to you, most relevant to you, but also what's the obstacles that you're like confronted with when trying to implement this standards. And we are planning to develop a kind of also like a checklist or a guideline for project developers out of this. And I think this is also circling back to what Monika said. Sometimes it's very complex, so we need to find ways to make it easier implementable. And I think this is what you also do with the guidelines that you're developing at OECD. And we are also definitely trying to contribute here. And yeah, we'll also be happy to share this study with you once it's out. I think we're planning to publish it in June or in summer. So as a small spoiler here, already mentioned. And I think the second work stream that we are engaging is energy partnerships. As dena, we are also implementing some energy partnerships for the German government. And first, we see that hydrogen is playing an increasingly important role within these partnerships. And obviously also the need from the partners to understand how can they really develop these potentials that come with hydrogen, and what's the barriers and what's possible solutions. And this is where we work together. And I think it's also nice that we really highlighted in this round that it's a team play that we are like kind of confronted here with. So this is also what we're doing, trying to work together to jointly understand what's the challenges, but also the opportunities for each country, because I think it's also good to highlight that the opportunities and challenges are very different. It's not like every emerging country is facing the same problems, or every developing country. I think it's also something that we need to be clear. So we are already looking at a country case, supporting countries and the questions that they have, investing in capacity building here, supporting in the development of hydrogen strategies, and in finding this peculiar opportunities per country. And yeah, maybe I stop here for now, and I hope this answered the question.
Yeah, Heino, yes, thank you, Andrea. Heino, you were eager to talk about Dutch disease issues, but perhaps, we're happy to listen to that, but perhaps before that, another question that came from the audience was, well, okay, but if all these very justified sustainability issues are taken into account, the social sustainability, you were talking about water issues, you know, there's not only the emissions issue that's untackled for now, but all sorts of other biodiversity issues when you developed on a large scale such things as green hydrogen. Will it still be competitive or feasible? So what's your reaction to that, and perhaps how can international standards help there in terms of the competitiveness of countries offering this? So if there's an international standard to have all these minimum sustainability standards, is the level playing field enough, or is there a risk that it just gets too expensive in the end?
Yeah, I think it's very clear. I mean, for climate reasons, we need to get the hydrogen and power-to-X economy up and running as quick as possible, because we will not reach net zero without. There are industry sectors, transport sectors that cannot be electrified, and in those sectors we need molecules and not just electrons. So we should not build up artificial barriers. And therefore, what we at the Power-to-X Hub argue for is take these issues, which I tried to list, take those on board at an early stage when you do projects. It is not about saying, well, the final product, the ton of hydrogen, must meet all those criteria, because it's also difficult to attach it to the product. It is about the project and the processes. And there, maybe it's not about labeling a product, but more about checking the chain. And there the OECD has tools developed in the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises, where you don't stamp a company or a product as being perfect, but you establish a system in which you ask the business sector to screen their value chains, to identify risks, and where you identify them, then come up with a management system, then report and monitor and provide complaint mechanisms, whistleblowing channels for civil society and others to bring up cases to solve them. So it is a different logic than just labeling and putting a stamp on, and this is green and wonderful, but to establish an international system of exchanging experiences to learn from the pathways. However, on certain topics, such as greenhouse gas emissions, Monika's case, there we really need proper accounting and agreed methodologies. Why? I would even go a step further. Once we have that, then why bother to transport fuel from Patagonia to Zuffenhausen, to Porsche? Let Porsche, or better, Lufthansa, Air France, buy the certificate for jet fuel produced with proper green standards, and then you don't have to transport it around half the world, but put it in the next plane and sell only the certificate. That would reduce dramatically the transportation costs and therefore the costs for jet fuel. So that's an opportunity for Chile, for Namibia, for South Africa and others. It only works, such a book and claim system, if you really have a properly defined standard. And for jet fuel, I'm pretty sure the market is clearly defined so that there are no loopholes for double accounting, etc. So just an example, once we have proper certification, then it opens even new opportunities of trading instead of transporting.
Thank you, Heino. And that brings me to a question that I was going to ask, and perhaps I'm going to put that to you, Monika. So Siemens, like other companies, has projects all around the world. You're in the United Arab Emirates at this moment. There are projects in Chile. And this is my question in terms of certification, but in a larger sense. How about transportation? So Chile is really far away from Germany, and I think you often have projects where there's partnerships with Germany, other places in Europe. Can transport be decarbonized with hydrogen in the end? And then you think it won't be a problem because you can transport or you have the certificate trading? Or does it make sense to look a little bit more to regional value chains in order to tackle that issue?
There are many points now to be answered. So let me take, starting from your last point, the regional topic. And I would like to take our project in Chile as an example. So Haraoni, it's called the strong wind. Hopefully I translated it in a correct way. So this is an area in Patagonia where we have a lot of wind, but building a transmission line there is really not possible, or it would mean, a high investment of cost. So in order to get this energy and bring a value to Chile, is that it's much easier to really build up this project in connecting the wind park to a hydrolyzer. And then, like Heino said, from electrons into molecules and then transported in such a way. So this is, there are areas in the world where the transport of energy has certain boundaries, but we still want to use this green energy because we all agree decarbonization is key. And that's, for example, one reason why we put it into this area, because a lot of energy is available there. And it's not only south of Chile, there are many other areas in the world where we can produce energy, but the way of making usage of it, it's the power to X way and not a different way of transport of energy. So that's and there is a lot of local support. Yeah, we also it's not that companies from Europe coming in and building something and then no, the local utilities are included, local companies are included. So there's a lot of activity and a lot of new businesses which is currently developing in this range. And I like what was Vanessa saying. So also there are universities now trying to teach these topics, and so I think this is a really new opportunity to build up and new to earn money. I think this is really opening and an important aspect for countries. So this is the one topic. And then you mentioned the topic of mobility or transportation. And I only can confirm what Heino said. So for there are areas in the mobilities where electricity does not fit. We can electrify our cars, but if we think of big tankers or planes, we cannot do it with batteries. Yeah, or still, I would say now we cannot do it with batteries because I don't know what will happen in the future. So we have to find other ways, and this is why hydrogen is one of the key elements to produce. The e-fuels, the RFNBOs, the green ammonia and green methanol, where we really decarbonize or capture the CO2 in a way that it supports our planet. So this is for sure, we have to decarbonize the mobility sector, but everything is not possible with electrical batteries. So this is why we have to find different solutions, and hydrogen for sure is one of the key ones, at least currently. And I think this is what we also forecast in the next couple years to come. And I think this is really where we have to go into it. I heard, Heino, that with this trading only of the certificates, yes, but the kind of, and there's a big discussion about mass balancing and book and claim. And there are a lot of people supporting the one or the other area. Personally, I would say if we sell something, the physical goods with the certificate, the level of greenwashing or double counting it's more difficult. And let's see how we will see how the future markets will develop. But still, you know, there is a big need of hydrogen in Europe, for example. So we still have to import it, even if we can. It does not help us if we only trade it. We also need it because the airplanes have to be filled somewhere, and it cannot be filled only with certificates. So I think hydrogen for us is also an energy form for storage for certain times during the day where we have less electricity available or where our transmission lines are overloaded. So I think you cannot say it's so or so. It really depends on the situation, and we have to cleverly, let me say, use all the different energy forms so that we can enable this decarbonization.
Thanks, Monika. And we're nearing the end, but I want to come back to a different point. And again, with pulling in Joseph and Vanessa on the local development. Joseph, I want to come back to the last point you made about green finance. So if I understand, or financing, if I understand correctly, you're also looking into how local financial markets can enable the development of green hydrogen. Is that what you said at the end of your last remark?
Yeah, this is, we look at how multiple financing sources can be mobilized in order to finance hydrogen projects. the starting point for this is that if we look at hydrogen projects, especially all along the value chain, this is a very capital intensive industry. And even though many emerging economies have, for instance, access to cheap renewable electricity, the fact that their cost of capital is much higher than in developed countries can make the projects less profitable eventually. So part of our work is, I would say, first to understand what is driving the cost of capital. Is it because of the perceived risk, or is it because of real risks of projects? So is the cost overestimated by investors? How can international investors as well as private investor or commercial finance work together in order to design instruments that can de-risk the different projects? So it's not only financing, but it's also possibly de-risking projects. And here we have a list of instruments. We also work on blended finance guidance for clean energy. And if I just take maybe one example of de-risking instruments, some institutional financier are providing some country risk guarantees that enable to mitigate the cost of capital in emerging economies. So I would say the first part is really on how to reduce the cost of capital. The second part is also on how to develop the local finance institutions to increase the supply of financing. Today, in many projects, project developers are counting on the public sector or multilateral development banks, development finance institutions to finance the projects. But given the scale of the markets and how it will become in the next decades, the private sectors will have to provide most of the financing. And for that reason, the supply of financing is key. And here we come back, maybe other panelists will want to discuss this, but here we come back to the profitability. And I think this was a question asked as well in the Q&A. If all the conditions are met, how can green hydrogen gain market share? And here, this is a different question than the supply of financing. This is more, where is green hydrogen needed compared to other decarbonization solutions, such as direct electrification? And then what are the political incentives that are given to make green hydrogen competitive with gray hydrogen? There is a technology part where green hydrogen costs will become lower, but that there can also be a part to understand how to build a level playing field. And this is maybe more on the regulatory and policy side.
Thank you, Joseph. And I think that's a good energy to get into what will be my last question, and it will be to you, Vanessa, because we talked a lot about the opportunities for local development, and you stressed industrial development. And my question to you is, aren't there also a lot of opportunities in terms of perhaps financial market developments, developing some high-end services attached to hydrogen development, but also innovation, basically, or you talked about training skilled labors, that's connected then to your higher education landscape. Do you pull all these dimensions into your action plan to make sure that the country benefits from hydrogen development?
Yes, we do. As I said in my for the first question, the national strategy for green hydrogen has 4 pillars. One of them is financing and incentives. As Joseph was saying, a lot of it in the first phase will come from government and multilateral organizations. We have, for example, financing coming from the IDB, the World Bank, but also the Chilean government that is evaluating what kind of financing and subsidies and incentives could be given to foster the development of green hydrogen in Chile, and also related to the development of specific technologies. We are aware that big portion of the technology it will be coming from international companies and not developed in the country. So we are considering this regarding incentives. And it's all part of the strategy that we are going to implement. But yes, all those pillars of those aspects are taking into account, and we are currently working on how to implement everything at the same time, which is quite complex.
Yes, I think that's a good closing for our debate, which was at the outset, at least, on the opportunities for emerging and developing countries, and certainly also on how countries like Germany can then benefit from partnerships. I learned a lot. I think we opened a full array of questions that merit further research, industrial development and discussion. So I do hope that I will see you again. Thank you, Joseph, for introducing us into the subject. Monika, Andrea, Vanessa, and Heino for giving us so many insights from different viewpoints. And thank you also to the audience for the lively discussion. And I think different connections were made, and that's what our discussions are here for as well. The sun is shining outside in Berlin, so maybe we could even produce some green hydrogen at this moment. But in any case, thanks a lot and have a lovely afternoon.